My name is Lucie Hedánková. Welcome to CrossTalk, a series of interviews through which we connect people and expertise from various disciplines within the NATO C3 agency. With shrinking defense budget and focus on achieving interoperability, nations are becoming increasingly interested in using capabilities that have been acquired or developed for NATO for their national defense purposes. The topic of today is interoperability in the area of C4ISR. We are in the NATO C3 agency in The Hague, and we have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Gernot Friedrich from Chief Technology Office.
Thank you, Lucie, for providing us the opportunity to be at CrossTalk today.
Gernot, could you tell us about your current activities within CTO?
At the Chief Technology Office in the agency, we are engaged with the entire coherency of NC3A's programs. Myself in particular, I'm working in the areas of enterprise architectures, interoperabilities, standardization, and last but not least, also in support to ongoing NATO missions like ISAF.
And what are the practical examples of software used in theater, and how do these missions actually influence your work?
The operations is at the heart of our work, and they represent what we are there for, to deliver C4ISR capability for the operators. And those missions have basically influenced us as an agency and the work we are doing since the early NATO operations on the Balkans. The biggest one, as we know, is ISAF, but also Operation Unified Protector have shown us that NATO capabilities, C4ISR capabilities that have been delivered to those operations, playing a very, very critical role in supporting those operations. What has been delivered, for example, is systems like the ICC, the Integrated Command and Control System. We have also a system that is now basically on every operational desktop to provide situational awareness or the Common Operational Picture, which is called IGOSIT. Others are systems like CHOC-Watch, Joint Operations Center Watch, which is a system that provides the electronic commander's diary for an operation. So these are just three examples, and there are many more of NATO capabilities that are now used in NATO-led operations, where nations have showed an increased interest of using those capabilities also for national defense purpose.
What is so specific about C4ISR software comparing to the other software?
I think the specifics in the C4ISR software or software-based systems compared to typical software systems that you know from your daily use, like an office software or a web portal, is that C4ISR is a spectrum that connects different communities in the conduct of their primarily military operations. So the use case is not a common use case that you find in industry. It's a very specific use case, command and control, that we have to support. And the nature of that business is that there's a lot of uncertainty. So military missions are basically characterized by uncertainty, and the C4ISR software has to take care of that. So we have to be flexible. That software needs to be built in a way that we can adopt quickly. So the software architecture has to cater for that. And just as an example, if you look to the experience we have in military missions, the personnel, for example, rotates every 6 to 12 months. Every person that comes in comes from a different multinational background with its own view of the world. But more importantly, at the same time, when we deal with a version release, typically, we also have changes in the operational plan for an operation. So The typical acquisition cycles that we have, if we are fast in support of operations, are 18 months. In these 18 months, we have 3 rotations of our users, and we have at least 1 revision of the operational plan. So that shows you that C4ISR software needs to be, on one hand, very robust and enable the typical military functions. On the other hand, it needs to be flexible enough so that we can adopt it very fast and very rapidly to those emerging requirements that are mission specific. And that requires, from a software architecture perspective, that we are very robust. We know what we have in that system, and we can expand it for those new requirements without breaking interoperability of the whole system, because that's what our users expect.
What about Afghanistan mission network?
I think the Afghanistan mission network, compared to the other operations before, has made a major change. It's a game changer, because before, in the other operations, basically we had separate mission networks for nations and for NATO. So NATO is only engaging at the higher level command levels, and that's where we were focusing on. With the Afghan mission network, those networks got federated and connected. So the impact on us from a software perspective can't be actually understated, because this now enabled and allowed us to connect systems to basically support the free flow of information across the different levels of command between nations and NATO, and also between nations itself. So therefore, the Afghan mission network is really a change in the way we have to deal with interoperability now in the NATO context and in C4ISR in specific.
And looking in the past and the future, how do you make sure that the NATO and nations software fit together in terms of interoperability?
I think going back in the past, as you said before, you can probably split the time between before the AMN and after the AMN, if you want to use that. Before that, we had what we called the so-called standards-only approach. So NATO was very much focused on standards, and we never really connected systems, or rarely connected systems in earnest in operations. So a lot of the standardization activities were paper-based and then based on exercises and interoperability events. Now interoperability is a key enabler for the operations, because we can now connect those systems. And one of the big lessons learned that we can basically take from the AMN is that instead of trying to look at interoperability across the entire spectrum of where you could imagine an information exchange requirement, where we really got the big wins out of that AMN was those areas where we enabled interoperability for very specific areas where the users wanted to share information. So not just being able to share information on a technical basis, but having an operational need to share information. So, and that is where, if you look to all the areas of interoperability that you could think about, the big changes are those where you add operational value for the warfighter. And these are the areas where the biggest benefits of interoperability pay off.
And how do you ensure security of those systems?
Of course, I think, as we all know from our daily experience in the internet, security is everywhere, and in particular in a military environment. Now, security is something you can't just add on to a system at the end. It's part of the design process. You have to start right from the beginning. Your architecture has to take that into account when you develop your system, when you develop your mission networks. So security is everywhere. But when it comes to the secure sharing of information, which we want to achieve, in that area we have to be able to distinguish information that you share from those ones that you probably don't want to share. And in the past we had those kind of domains restricted on a system level, so a system was considered to be confidential or secret, and not the information itself. What we are now going to do is we are looking at the content of those systems, the data holdings, the information itself, and we have to label and identify information objects with their respective security classifications and markings, so that depending on the need or the responsibility that we have to share information with our mission partners, we can do that in a secure way, because we still have to, of course, protect the security of our information. So information labeling is, I think, one of the next critical things we have to get across all these application systems, and to make that work, it needs to be standardized.
Recently, during special session of the Agency Management Policy Board, a mention was made to C4ISR suite. Could you elaborate on this one in terms of life cycle?
Okay, I would probably go back to the examples I gave in terms of the systems that are being used. It's not just the 3, as I mentioned. There's a whole series of 8 to 10 different software systems where we can see in all these operations repeatedly being used by the different military functions. And we have within those software suites or within those software tools also interoperability requirements. This is another area that became apparent in the operations, that the traditional software development approach was alongside the lines of the military functions. So you have your intelligence systems, you have your operational systems, logistics systems, and so on. But there's a lot of information sharing and processes that go across those different military functions. Now, that was an area that we didn't spend much effort on in the past. The operations have shown us that we have to actually look at information exchanges between these military functions as well. The C4ISR tool suite is an approach to look at bringing all these different tools together under one coherent management approach, where we have a common user interface, we have common data structures, and we can, as you mentioned on the lifecycle side, we can manage it together so that when one tool progresses in its lifecycle, the other tools are still interoperable with that new version of that new tool. And that's where our Management Policy Board endorsed the approach of a tool suite, where we basically bundle individual applications into a suite that is being managed together. But the other word that you mentioned is multinational tool suite. As I mentioned earlier, the nations are going or have requested national use of NATO capabilities. So to allow them to get the required lifecycle support for that, the proposal is to establish a multinational program where they can then have the required governance structures, support packages and training packages all defined centrally. So we don't do that for every individual nation separately, but have one package for all the nations together that want to join that, of course. And that again is another approach to get coherence and interoperability, because then nations start to train on the same systems before they deploy at home. So that multinational C4ISR tool suite is basically one way of achieving interoperability and coherence in the area of C4ISR.
From the development perspective, what phases are important in development of capabilities?
I think the most important phase is the requirements analysis. If you don't know the requirements, you can't build or develop or buy a system that actually is fit for purpose. So therefore, from my point of view, the most important phase is the requirements analysis phase. The next phase then, as we go through the development, in that phase we have to search already with the engagement of the user to make a constant check if we actually are delivering and developing the right capability. And then we have our deliveries, but then we go through another phase which becomes more and more important, which is the testing. And security was mentioned before, but it's also the interoperability testing, because these tools are not standalone. NATO tools are primarily focused on an operational level, and nations reach down to the tactical level. So there's still an interoperability requirement between these tools that we consider part of the C4ISR tool suite and national tactical systems. And there's an increased level of interoperability testing required before those capabilities can be fielded, because we owe it to our soldiers on the ground that we deliver mature, fully interoperably, fully tested systems, rather than things that are not stable enough. And we don't want to repeat some of the examples that we see in the commercial world, where the first release is basically used to beta test that with the users. We can't allow that in the military environment.
Apart from the interoperability, you have also mentioned coherency. In what way do you achieve coherency?
Coherency, we talked about the interoperability. Coherency is primarily on the programmatic side, and we just talked about 10 different tools for different functional areas, and we have to get the development and the life cycle progression of those tools synchronized. Typically that is executed via separate projects. Now, if you look to the coherency across that's the programmatic coherence. But in the NATO environment, the alliance environment, we also have to then share this information with our program managers, project managers in the nations, because if they are developing their capabilities and acquiring their capabilities to be interoperable with NATO capabilities, we have to enable that kind of coherency across the whole or the entire alliance. And if we go one step further with the comprehensive approach that NATO is embarking on, then in that area we even have to go beyond the boundaries, traditional boundaries of the military aspects, and look into areas of civil and civil emergency response capabilities, what they are doing there. We have to keep an eye on that. And one of the critical enablers for that is the use of open standards. And we see that trend in the civil world as well, that the world is becoming too complex and for single entities to run it entirely. And the single success story we really have the single biggest success story we have in the AMN as well is using open standards to enable coherence in the program management as well, because it allows us to decouple proprietary developments from the interoperability aspects that we try to achieve.
With whom do you cooperate to deliver capabilities?
It's a wide variety, because all the activities that NC3 is being engaged in basically lead to coherence and interoperability at the end. In the R&D phases, research and development phases of our activities, we have engagement with the respective establishments in the nations, but also universities, academia. So that's one of the reach outs. If you go into the acquisition of primarily IT infrastructure, this is where engagement with industry is essential. And then we also reach out, of course, in the area of the C4SR systems to see what NATO Nations defense industry can provide us in terms of technologies that provide additional capability to the end user. So we basically engage with whoever we need across the life cycle to deliver the best for our customers, which are the warfighters.
Lately we hear quite a lot about smart defense. How do you fit with your activities within this new paradigm?
I think smart defense is to a large degree about reuse capabilities. What we have seen in NATO for quite a long time is that NATO as an organization was looking at nations, what we can use in terms of national capabilities within the context of NATO. This is changing over the last 3 years, and more nations with the shrinking defense budgets look at NATO, what they can actually reuse for national purpose. And that's how you open the CrossTalk today. So this is where the proposals that our management board made, like a multinational C4SR program, is targeting at, is reusing capabilities, managing it together, because if we do it that way, we are interoperable right from the beginning. Nations can train at the operational level with those tools at home. They can use that for national purposes as well. And once they come together in a NATO-led mission, it's nothing new for them. It's basically business as usual. We don't have to build interoperability in. It's basically there from the get-go, from the start. And if you look to the cost aspects, instead of developing a similar capability 28 times, those nations that actually go together in a multinational project or program, they can basically share those capability development, but to a certain degree also the sustainment costs, and divide that, probably not by 28, but by a certain number, which provides them savings and gains them interoperability.
How does current NATO acquisition practices enable smart defense?
Traditionally, NATO acquisition was, as I said earlier, we were trying to reuse national capabilities for NATO. But what we have seen in recent acquisitions, like the air command and control information systems, these practices also allow us to apply a model where NATO designs the software and industry is providing the implementation of the software, rather than buying a system from industry and just modify it for NATO use. The big difference for that is that the first model, which we applied for the ARC2S program, allows us as NATO, as the alliance, to retain ownership of the entire product, which means we have the flexibility to change the contractor, the industry, but at the same time, that's the important thing for the nations, is that NATO owns the product, and that means we collectively own the product. That means nations can use it for national purposes. Whereas if we follow another model, which is also possible in the current NATO acquisition practices, where we basically buy an industry product and modify it for our use, then in our current terms and practices on acquisition, in that model we would only have a right to use for NATO, but nations would actually have to renegotiate for the same product the right to use it for national purposes again. So this is, both models are basically supported by acquisition practices that we have, but there's no clear direction from the nations on which one they prefer. So therefore, depending on what is most cost efficient for the NATO military command structure, it turns out one way or the other. Another element that I would like to mention at that point is an initiative that Allied Command Transformation has started in that area, and they even go further and they say, why don't we develop capabilities as a NATO community? So basically learning from the successes of open source projects and provide national capabilities, could be industry, could be governmental capabilities, and NATO all together, and we basically have a NATO community development approach where capabilities are developed together and used together. And I think that's also something which we should investigate, if that is an approach to achieve interoperability on one hand, but also support smart defense, where we then can reuse those capabilities nationally and in the NATO context.
And last but not least, the upcoming transition, when NATO C3 agency will become a part of the new Communications and Information agency. How do you think your activities and your projects, above all, will be affected by this change?
You mentioned earlier the life cycle. I concentrated on mostly the early stages of the life cycle, and I think the new agency will provide us with a great opportunity to expand these coherence activities across the entire life cycle. So not just the requirements analysis, capability development and acquisition and implementation phase, but the entire spectrum of operational support of those tools when they are fielded. Because one of the critical lessons learned we had with software is that software is not like a piece of equipment that is being developed once and then delivered and it stays there. Software has a life cycle which is very rapidly changing. So we have major version releases of C4SI capabilities, which are basically within a year's time frame. That's the average change rate. In some critical capabilities, even faster. And we need that to basically cope with the changing requirements in a military mission. We have to understand that in a military mission, requirements we don't know all the requirements up front. There's always emerging requirements, and we have to react quickly. So by moving the O&M part, which is the current NCSA and NPC Glons, together with the acquisition and development part into one organization, I think we can really become much more efficient in the way we deliver adaptable, flexible C4SI capabilities for our end users in operations. So that's a great opportunity, and again, by not looking at each phase of the life cycle differently, I think we can also look at the cost savings we can get out of that, because we have to look at the O&M impacts of software changes at the same time. And by bringing that under one organizational roof, I think we have one manager responsible for the entire life cycle, and that is a great achievement.
Gernot, thank you for sharing your experience with us today. I hope you enjoyed watching and will join us for the next series of CrossTalk.